welcome. It is Thursday afternoon. We have Dr. Joe here today. He's at 99 subs, so if you're over on YouTube, you want to learn a little bit about leadership, management, history. You know, we cover it all over there.
Sociology.
Dr. Joe Aniello, Aniello. I can't spell, but there it goes. Go check him out. Give him be number 100. But he is here today. He writes some articles. He wrote one about biblical Babel, and we wrote one recently about the government of Judaism. And so that's what we're going to be covering today. Josh, what radicalized you?
On what topic in particular? I'd say I grew up. My dad, he was very into conspiracy theories, and I think not to put him down or anything, but I think to an unreasonable extent. But I couldn't deny certain things about certain conspiracies. And the more I began to kind of explore historical narratives and basically, you know, Joe, you've heard the expression red pilled before, like where people wake up to the truths about certain things. You start to read a little bit more into the nuance of history, the nuance of even the history of the latter half of this century, the nuance into World War II, World War I, and you start to see that some of the mainstream narratives about events, you know, any event that you could probably come to mind, certain stories and certain aspects seem to come across less realistic. And you start to question things like, why, for example, are we about to start another war looking for nuclear weapons that may or may not exist when we did that in 2003? We invaded a foreign country to look for nuclear weapons we knew they had. We were being told they had them. Invaded, got in there, didn't have them. The exact same thing is about to happen again. So that's history repeating itself in my lifetime alone. And so, you know, basically, I'm being very vague here, but you know, so you can feel free to jump in anytime.
Well,
actually, that's a great segue.
Well, I asked you just so I could ask Joe the same question. I mean, you're a little bit older. I think the younger generation is much more radicalizable, malleable, if you will. You kind of older people a little bit stuck in their ways some. So what radicalized you? How did you get here? Because, I mean, you know, we've talked before and you haven't always had this position.
Well, I guess I'm a product of, immigrant success. I'm also a product of both corporate experience and academic experience. I'm a product of moderate democratic political views and make America first, make America great again, make America first kind of views. So I'm kind of an amalgam of some things which might normally be, counterintuitive or actually just counterproductive. And so without being too full of myself, I guess I feel my view is somewhat unusual. I won't say unique, but I've had the blessings and the benefits of some perspectives, many of which were not to my credit. I mean, I didn't get on a boat when I was 16 and come to America from Italy. I didn't sign up for the Navy in 1943 and fight in World War II. But I was the benefit of immigrants who were part of the American dream. And I guess I figure my job is to not get set in my ways and to not stop evolving and to continue questioning and trying to make whatever contribution I can to make the world just a little bit better than the way I found it.
Yeah. Okay, so
maybe we're both kind of giving you not the answers you're
vague.
looking for.
You're not answering you're answering the question, but you're not answering the question.
So I'll answer your question a little bit more directly just to kind of get the ball rolling. What kind of woke me up on this is in 2015, Donald.
What is this, Josh?
The Jewish question, the JQ. So I'll be very specific. In 2015, Donald Trump came onto the scene, and he changed the nature of political discourse in my lifetime alone. You know, growing up, I knew who Obama was. I knew these things. I knew my parents didn't particularly care for him because of his takes on the economy and how he handled certain issues, but I didn't really fully understand it. Donald Trump is who got me interested in politics in the first place. And specifically, there was all these other commentators that started to pop up and become popular at the same time. Gavin McInnes is one of them, and Ben Shapiro is one of them. Ben Shapiro was someone I was drawn to. I liked his take on transgenderism, and he was someone who was very outspoken about his faith. And this is something I was not used to seeing at the time. And even though he was Jewish, I grew up in a very like evangelical, traditional Christian household, which basically kind of stated that as Christians, like in a religious sense, Jewish people were like our grandparents. They were, they were like our spiritual cousins almost. They didn't believe in Jesus, but they did believe in the same God. And they had like, they were the chosen people. They had this sort of divine right. You know what I mean? That's what I was kind of led up to believe. And I remember I had this moment where I looked up to Ben Shapiro. I was like 17 years old at the time, and I really looked up to Ben Shapiro. But I had this thought, and I said to myself, I was like, but wait a minute. Ben Shapiro does not believe in Jesus. He can't get into heaven. And that didn't sit well with me because I was like, clearly Ben Shapiro is a good man. Ben Shapiro is this like spiritual leader, and he's fighting for what's right.
Josh,
He's fighting for what's moral.
Blasphemous.
Just hear me out. He's fighting for what's right. He's fighting for what's moral. How can someone this good not get into heaven? How could a good God not let this guy into heaven? Well, as time went on, my perspective began to change. And, I work in radio, and I remember I got hit with something where I was working doing commercials. I was doing voiceover commercials for people, and I got one for it was like this Jewish society thing. And I ended up not doing it because there was a line in the thing where they were talking about tackling anti-Semitism. I'm like, heck yeah, man, they're our spiritual cousins. I'm all for it. But there was a line in their commercial that I wasn't comfortable with reading because they said, we're trying to combat these myths about the Jewish people, that like Jewish people are demonic or blah, 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 like that they steal, that they're skeevy or whatever, combating all these myths about the Jewish people. But one of them was said, and the myth that the Jews crucified Jesus. And that didn't sit well with me because I had read scripture. I was a very devout Christian. I mean, I still am a very devout Christian. And it didn't sit well with me because it wasn't true. They say, well, the Romans crucified Jesus. I'm like, yeah, they put him up on the cross. But I mean, if we're being really honest about it, they did it at the behest of the Jewish people. And I didn't really see, like, I was like, if I were Jewish, I wouldn't be dishonest about it. I don't really see what their apprehension in kind of admitting to that is. Why are they trying to cover this up almost? And, we can get into more specifics, but little things like that were kind of chinks in the armor of my upbringing and belief about the this Christian Jewish like cohabitation belief. And I'll finish up real quickly here. Where I grew up basically believing you had God came and he went to Abraham and he went to Moses and King David and blah, blah, blah. And you have the Jewish faith. You have the Jews. Jesus comes at a point in time and it changes the nature of the faith. It's almost like this diversion in a, upward, downward, whatever you say. I would say upward. And that the Jews kind of stayed on a steady track. The modern day Jews are the continuation of the old religion without Jesus. But the more I began to delve into church history, the more I began to delve into history itself, I realized it's actually the opposite. Christianity is the continuation, the true successor of original Judaism, and modern day Judaism is completely different from the old days, and of course, nothing like modern day Christianity. Like the old day, like that Christians are actually the true successors to God's original promise, who truly have the blessing. And the Bible says as much. Jesus says as much, and Paul says as much. So this was sort of the beginning in my journey towards realizing that my belief about modern day Judaism was completely false.
Well, and I guess I'm picking up on the little bit of the history introduction that you gave. I'm certainly not as well-versed in the religious and scriptural aspects of the Bible. I guess I'm a little bit more from a sociological and psychological perspective. And one of the reasons I've taken an interest in this anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism has been prevalent for 2,000 years, and because it has happened in mostly every country where the Jews have had any kind of representative population, I am very concerned at the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States. I certainly don't want to be the cause of any kind of civil war. I certainly don't want that to be the cause of any kind of violence or harm against anybody. But the problem I'm having is that if you continue to do the same thing and expect different results, that's a definition of insanity. And I think in order to maybe approach anti-Semitism from a different aspect, I've recommended a couple of things that are a little bit different. They are inspired, or they are at least somewhat shaped by my Catholic Christian faith and my belief that Jesus was the Messiah. But I think the Jews made a couple of really tactical miscalculations. I think, at the time of the Old Testament, 6,000 years, let's say 4,000 BC till the time of Christ, the world was very small. So I think declaring yourself the chosen people among the Hittites and the Canaanites, I think, was okay. Now that the world has expanded, we now know that the Sumerians, that folks in South America, that folks in India, that folks in Asia really preceded the beginning of the world according to the Bible. The Jews might think the world is 6,000 years old, but scientists have artifacts that are 10, 15,000 years old. And so you kind of have to question whether the God that was written in the Old Testament is really the only God. There are some folks, if you ever watch the show on Discovery, Ancient Aliens, there's a lot of ancient alien theorists who believe that God, in fact, was an alien. So some of the things that are created 15, 20,000 years ago totally predate the Jewish influence. And so if you look at the world beyond the Middle East, and I have to say, Jews are, quite interested in intellectual development. They're very well educated. They're very scientific. So I think the fact that the Jewish people still claim that they're the one and only chosen people of the one and only God, I think is kind of old-fashioned. To me, I put it in the category of, the earth is flat and the sun revolves around the earth. The atom is the smallest component. No, it's not. There's nanotechnology. So I think by Jewish people still maintaining that they are, God's chosen people in a 21st century world, I think is somewhat foolish. And so I think the folks who decided that in the Bible, I think, were kind of short-sighted and myopic in their writing of the Old Testament, okay, and not revising it. Also, I think the fact that a very small group of Jewish people decided that Jewish was not, in fact, the Messiah that was prophesied, is also a mistake. And so there are millions of Jews who followed that advice or that doctrine based on maybe a couple of elders at the time that didn't like the fact that Jesus was substituting the values of love for the values of legalism. It's kind of like we don't like the message. It's kind of like, anti-Jesus was the original anti-Trumpers. There were Jesus derangement syndrome by the Jews at that time. And so the fact that, they don't recognize Jesus and they still maintain that they were God's only one and chosen people, I think causes them more harm than good. And one of the things that I like about the Catholic religion is that the Pope can kind of speak for Catholicism with one voice. And the Jews don't have that. They have orthodoxy, they have conservative, they have reform, but no one is really able to say, hey, you know what? This thing in the Old Testament, this worked for a long time, but we think this is, the cause of a lot of our problems. This arrogance, this audacity, the fact that we think we're better than everyone else kind of rubs people the wrong way, especially when we prove that it's no longer true. And I think taking that attitude of superiority is, I think, one of the things that breeds the anti-Semitism. And I think if Jewish people or someone who spoke for the Jewish people were to revise that tenet of their religion, maybe that non-Jews would be more receptive to embracing them and welcoming them in the greater world, not treating them as somewhat separate and somewhat elite. I think that might be a good first step to break down the causes of anti-Semitism. And I don't really see that happening. And so I think anti-Semitism is just building and building as time goes on in the United States. And that's of a real concern to me.
If I could say, I think
There's
we're
a lot
tiptoeing around.
There's a lot to unpack there. But
I was going to say, I think we're kind of like, we were tiptoeing in the beginning and we're almost jumping the gun a little
think
bit.
we do.
I actually am a ballet dancer, so I could walk around on my toes. Yeah.
So I want to say, Zeb, do you want to make an attempt to kind of bring it to today and why this is a relevant topic right now? Like, why are we talking about anti-Semitism, how to prevent it, and why it's on the rise today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think maybe I didn't know you were Catholic. Maybe I did, but I just didn't realize it. Maybe we need to have that discussion because I think the papacy is a lie, but that's a little bit off.
I can trash the Protestant Reformation as well as the the Jewish Old Testament. So yeah, let's bring it on.
But yeah.
No wonder you don't get along with Southerners.
Well, we're lumped in with the Muslims and the Jews. We're not considered
That's
real
true.
Christians,
That is true. That was something I was brought up to believe, that like the Catholics were worse than the Muslims almost.
Oh, I feel the wrath. I felt the wrath.
But yeah, I guess there's a lot to unpack there. But kind of bringing it forward, and you kind of walk through history a little bit there. The reason, at least that I would say there is a rise in anti-Semitism is because it has been enforced against us. And so it's natural for one to want to rebel from the thing. And so if it is made to be against the law, you are then provoked to question the thing itself, right? And so if there's laws against anti-Semitism, then why should we be anti-Semitic? Why are there even laws against it? Are we not a country of free speech? Right? Why can we not question anything, whether that's World War II all the way down through Judaism? But we've been crying Judeo-Christian since probably World War I, the Balfour Declaration, into World War II, and the establishment of Israel has been the rise of this Judeo-Christian worldview, where Judeo-Christian didn't exist prior to that because they are two separate things, very much separate things, and one doesn't build on the other. It fulfills the other, if you will. And so that fulfillment perverts the thing itself if it continues, which is kind of what the argument that you and Josh have made. And so here we are now today where you have the same thing that's happened throughout history, throughout all of these other countries, whether that's Spain 1940 or 1492, where they had the expulsion of the Jews and then turn around and it's their golden age. You've talked about the golden age of America coming, where generally Jews go to a country and they manipulate immoral practices for their own gain. And that falls under this idea of pornography or usury. And then they take these immoral pieces for their own gain, and usury being the primary one where they gain power through that, right? Everybody preaches about compound interest. Well, being a debtor and being in debt is sinful. Christians aren't supposed to lend people money on interest because it is sinful. And so what happens is people come in that will do it, and so they gain power and power and power. If you look at money charts since 1971, especially since we've come off the gold standard, but prior to that, even the Fed in the establishment of that early 1900s, I mean, it's straight up essentially, right? And so this fluctuation of money allows them the power to gain influence, and then once they have the influence, they make the laws to subvert and even enforce the thought process of other people through the enforcement of those anti-Semitic laws, which we are not allowed to question anymore. Is that
Yeah, and I think we're too eager right now, if I may say, to jump into the historical aspect of it. I want to kind of bring it into today and think. I think it's good for the audience if we start with this, because I'll tell this from my perspective. As like before I got interested in politics and history in 2015, I was like, a normie. I was what we would call like or Kennard would call a Seinfeld watcher. I was just passively interested in all these things. And what you begin to see is like the only two contexts that I would think about Jews in was this: Scripture and the Holocaust. The only time in my day-to-day life, not even day-to-day, just whenever the word Jew like came up, I would go, I would either think the Christian narrative, the Old Testament, or the Holocaust when Hitler, exterminated 6 million Jews. And so through like my entire perspective of the Jewish faith, of the Jewish people, is that of persecution. And so I immediately put them into that category of like, this is a persecuted minority. This is a persecuted class of people. Well, why are they persecuted? You go to the Old Testament and you say, well, it's because they were God's chosen people. And why was Hitler, a madman, able to mind control an entire nation into systematically exterminating an entire group of people? Because they're God's chosen people. Because there's almost satanic influence involved in persecuting these people. And then you bring it into today. So to the normal person, these are the context. That's why you sort of get this evangelical support of the Jewish faith. Like I said, they're almost like our spiritual cousins. But nowadays, you're seeing this narrative shift basically in the favor of the minority view. If you are the oppressed person in any given situation, you are therefore in the right. The Native Americans, the African slaves, you name it.
Illegal immigrants.
Illegal immigrants.
Yep.
If you are the underdog, no matter the circumstance or background, you are therefore in the right. That is the narrative now. And so what you're seeing is after October 7th, Israel was attacked by Hamas from Gaza on October 7th of 2023. And what you have seen is, like, even back when this happened, I said, well, obviously Israel has to retaliate. They have to show force and they can't take this lying down. That's what I would do if I were them. It makes sense. But what you've seen is 2 years later, they are still bombarding these people with explosives, with fires, with bombs. They're demolishing hospitals because one Hamas soldier might be in there. It is clearly excessive. And so with this common narrative in favor of the minority view in all cases in America, you're seeing this turn against the Jewish narrative of victimization. And that's why I think you're starting to see this change or this uprising in so-called anti-Semitic views right now. I would say they're in large part not anti-Semitic. Of course, you're going to get Muslims who say we need to kill all Jews because they say we need to kill everyone who's not a Muslim. But you're also seeing people saying things that are rational, like, this is excessive. But the Jewish response is that they put you in the same class as the Muslims. They say, oh, you want to kill all Jews because you're not in favor of us bombing hospitals. Because, guess what? Because of the proliferation of social media, you are now seeing images coming out of Gaza of like families, babies, children being exploded by airplanes. And you say, I don't know how I feel about that. And they say, well, I'll tell you how you should feel about that. You should be okay with it because they're immoral. Because even though they're children, they would have grown up to become terrorists. That is quite literally what they have. Like, I've been working in the news media since that's happened. That is what they have said.
And if you look to the root cause of that, it's because there's an inherent feeling that we are somehow better. So one of our lives is worth 100 or 1,000 lesser lives. And see, the problem I have with it is the self-chosen, the chosen people description is self-described. In other words, it's not like another group of people said, yeah, the Jews are the chosen people. They've said it about themselves. And that doesn't have the credibility that I would ascribe to an objective source that evaluates someone as being better or worse, less or more. The other thing about the Middle East is they get to control what is right or wrong, what is excessive or inexcessive. And what people in America don't seem to understand is that the Palestinian folks, they were the victims of the Holocaust from Germany. And the Middle Easterners who are not Jewish, I think, feel that the creation of Israel in 1948 on a Palestinian homeland was the original sin. So they are just trying to rectify the wrong that was done for them. But because of the American support and strength, because of some of the Western propaganda, no one really speaks up for the Palestinian side in any of this. Certainly the news media doesn't. And I can't understand why the Palestinian people were punished for the for the German war crimes.
It was promised to them 2,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, whenever it was.
That's like me saying, I'm promising myself, it's Greenwich, Connecticut, 100 years from now. Why don't the Indians or the Native Americans get their land back that they had 2,000 years ago?
Yeah, it's the clearest sign of double standard, and it's not just a single instance. It's across the board, right? They want to rail against this idea of anti-nationalism. They call it white supremacists, but I'm a nationalist, and they want to rail against nationalism, yet they want their own ethno-state. They want to rail against superiority, but yet they are the ones that believe themselves to be the chosen people. And it's just a double standard all the way up and down. And so when people are starting to finally call it out, maybe it's too late. I don't know. But at some point, we have to recognize that America must be ran by Americans. Otherwise, it is not American. I mean, it's literally that simple.
Well, and you see these things, like you'll see these charts. You'll see these things. It's like there are 5 conglomerates that basically every single news media station falls under the umbrella of one of these 5 conglomerates. And you see a chart that says 4 out of 5 of them are owned and operated by Jewish people. And you go, oh, that's kind of like, if you were to just tell that to a simple person, they might just go, oh, okay. But the reaction to saying that is, it's almost like this pain response. Like, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to bring these things up. And you begin to question, and again, we're kind of getting into how this all got started. You begin to question why that is. Why is 2% of the population running all of the news media? And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a simple fact. Like the names and operators of corporations, this is on file. This is not like top secret information. It is public knowledge.
Yes, but somehow, if you point that out, you're labeled as anti-Semitic.
Right.
And so I feel the anti-Semitic card is played by Jewish people in the same manner that the race card is played by black people. And getting back one of your other points from an academic perspective, it makes perfect sense that 2% of the population, in order to leverage their influence, would be attracted to money, because money multiplies the influence of their power. So they don't have the numbers of people, they don't have the votes. So by being attracted to the areas that make them the most money, that multiplies their influence by logarithmic factors. So I think it's very normal if you're 2% of the population and you want 50% of the influence. The way to do that is get guns, or get money. And before Israel, they weren't able to accumulate any kind of land of their own and to accumulate the weapons. But I think now that they have that, we're seeing that their influence is going beyond individual countries, but it's really going into world politics. I mean, the fact that the United States is considering giving Israel bunker buster bombs to destroy what may or may not be nuclear sites in Iran, I think that, to me, looks like we are Israel's puppet. because the world is going to hate Americans for facilitating an objective that is, 2% of the population.
That sounds
Seems crazy.
That sounds awful familiar to something that happened a while back, giving Israel weapons because somebody else might have a WMD. I think we fought 2 wars over that, didn't we, Joe?
Yeah, and I guess I don't know who influenced
false information coming from a specific entity to the United States started us in a 20-year war.
Yep, and W was trying to finish the job that Daddy couldn't finish.
Yeah, and I think this is becoming extremely relevant now because most people before now didn't think about this kind of stuff. And what you're starting to see now is it's becoming very clear because the narrative, and like people I work with, they tell me this is why they support Israel so vehemently, because they're a Western outpost in the Middle East. The Middle East is full of illiterate sand savages like Arabians and Muslims, and this is what Americans think about it. They think, oh, it's the Middle East is full of Muslims. It is full of these primitive cultures, primitive people, and Israel is our ally. They wear suits. They comb their hair. They don't wear all this strange foreign stuff that we're not used to seeing. I mean, look at Benjamin Netanyahu. He's well kept. He wears a suit. He wears a tie. They're just like us. But what you're starting to see is that the interest in our nation, the interest of our 2 nations, are no longer as aligned as the common person would think they are. When you think of like, oh, we have proxies in the world, like how Puerto Rico is technically, if you're born in Puerto Rico, you get citizen. They're like a proxy of ours. And it's kind of the same way in Israel. But now what you're seeing is Israel was attacked and they are retaliating against their neighbors in a way you would not personally do, that your average American would say is excessive. But they're insisting that this is the right thing to do, and it's kind of rubbing people the wrong way. And now the threat of a war with Iran is on the verge of say, well, why do we have to go to war with Iran? I grew up and we were fighting a war in the Middle East. We just got out. Why do we want to do another one? Well, because there's nukes, because they would come for you next. And the truth is, I don't believe I don't believe that. They say, well, these Muslim nations like Iran, they're already here, and they say, well, they hate the West. They hate the West. That's why they hate Israel, and that's why they hate us. And that narrative is being challenged because they say, well, they hate infidels. But Russia are technically infidels by the Muslim standard. China are technically infidels by the Muslim standard. Yet they're allies with them. Why is that? Why do they hate America specifically? And I would say now we can kind of get into the history, you go back to the founding of Israel, you can say who has the right to the land. You can bicker about that all the live long day. But the truth is, it doesn't matter because both sides feel entitled to it. That is why they're constantly fighting with each other, because there was basically a genocide to set up Israel in the 1940s. People were displaced from their homes in Palestine. And you could say, well, it was never their home to begin with. That's all fine and dandy, but that's how they felt about it. That's why they don't like you, and we're supporting them. That's why they don't like us. And so for Americans to say, well, you know what? Maybe it's time to come to the table with these people. I don't think they hate us because of the way we live. I don't think they hate us because we live in 2-story houses and don't wear head coverings. I think they hate us for these historical reasons. It's the same reason they don't hate Russia. When you start to challenge that, you see tremendous pushback.
Well, I think it's becoming more and more clear that Israel and Judaism is not Western.
Yes.
And it's clashing with what we have. And so they should be viewed just as Muslims are viewed. They should be viewed just as atheists are viewed. They are not Western by their very nature. Mm-hmm. And so I think you said a lot of words, but I think that's kind of where you were getting at, is there's a clashing that's happened that they're obviously they're not Western countries, right? Benjamin Netanyahu can dress up all he wants, but he's still a Middle Eastern.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Or mid, anything other than West is essentially what they are. They're
Yes.
nomadic people, and they always will be. That's just the nature that they are.
And that's what I was saying to a coworker of mine yesterday, not the ones you're probably thinking of, but I was talking to a salesman at my job, and he was talking about how like these Muslims, they need to be wiped off the face of the earth, which is not a Christian thing to do. Even if I agreed that like they're a huge problem, I don't think we should exterminate entire groups of people.
Genocide is bad.
Genocide is evil.
Why is
satanic.
that so hard?
Yes.
That's not very hard.
But my point is I do think that Muslims are fanatical. Muslims are anti-Western, and Muslims are sand savages, as they've been presented in the media for so many years. But I think that the Israelis are the same. But they've been presented otherwise. And it's easy to see with how they've retaliated.
They have optics, and they're a little bit smarter,
Yeah.
and so they present themselves in a
and you don't
separate
see
way.
it on Fox News, but if you go on Twitter, I mean, there was a news story that broke about how they were what's the word I'm looking for? Sodomizing Hamas prisoners with sticks. They were like fake raping them with sticks. Is that something we would be okay with doing here in the United States to our enemies?
Well, and you guys we've talked a little bit about Jesus, a little bit about Americans, and I think one of the things that we need to get back to is when America was great, I think we were living the principles and the values taught by Jesus. And so I'm not as concerned about the Israeli Jews as I am the American Jews. Because
hold on.
they are having unnecessary influence on our economy and our politics.
They're one and the same, though.
Yes.
Well, culturally, yes, but
No. Influence-wise, right? So what is AIPAC?
right, that is the most powerful lobbying agency in Washington that buys the votes of a lot of congressmen.
We all know what that is, but we should explain it to the audience.
He kind of loosely. AIPAC they are a foreign lobby that doesn't have to register as a foreign lobby. And by not registering as a foreign lobby, they don't have to disclose where their money comes from or really where it goes. And so
The American Israeli Political Action Committee,
Right.
AIPAC.
yes,
AIPAC, yeah.
and it's run through Israel. And so a lot of our defense funding that goes to Israel that we write a check or grant for at the beginning of the year goes to AIPAC. And what happens to that AIPAC money? It goes right into American politics. And that's why you have Israeli flags flying at the U.S. Capitol in D.C. offices all over the place. What's the most recent guy that hit the news? Randy Fine. Dude weighs like 450 pounds. But he's a major Zionist. And it's like you were talking about earlier, these people are leveraging money to buy votes because they don't have the numbers to make the damage to the U.S. that they want to make.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is when Benjamin Netanyahu goes on the news and talks about things, I view him as a foreigner. Mark Levin,
Correctly.
he has a radio show every night from 6 to 9. He seemed to be very much an American, a supporter of Trump, Make America Great Again, America First, very much an American of Jewish descent. Like I consider myself an Italian of Jewish descent. But after October 7th, he turned. He turned into, by his commentary, by his news, by his use of the media, by his microphone, to me, he turned into a Jewish person of American descent. And
I think Bill Ackman is a better example because Mark Levin has always been a rabid, like pro-Zionist, but Bill Ackman is a social liberal businessman, billionaire businessman who was, pro DEI, Black Lives Matter, all the like pro transgenderism, all the typical sort of like 2020 style, like liberal consensus. October 7th happens, he supports Donald Trump.
yeah, because, again, I think it's inherent into the chosen people ideology is since we are better than others, we should get our way on everything. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower who said that Jewish people have a real distorted perspective. They see themselves as much more and much more important than they are, and they see Gentiles as much less than they are. I worked in New York City. Well, when I graduated college, I moved to New York City and worked for a while, and I was so naive about ethnicity. I asked a guy by the name of Alan Schulman what his ethnicity was. Well, that's a very Jewish name. Of course, that's how naive I was. But when I was working among Jewish people in New York City, I saw, kind of when Jewish people let their guard down, they would say things about Gentiles. Retail is for Gentiles. Gentiles are schmucks. They showed their true colors in the fact that they felt superior to Gentiles. Now, I guess that level of confidence, again, trying to be academic, that level of confidence is wonderful. Self-confidence is something you want to give your children. You want to be able to project confidence. But I think it goes over the line into distorted perspective, as Eisenhower said. You are not all that. You don't deserve to get everything like that. But they're smart enough to know, since we don't have the votes, we got to buy the votes.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1960s, the Doors wrote a song during the hippie revolution. You may have the guns, but we have the numbers. The teenagers were trying to amass the vote to outvote some of the establishment people. Well, the Jews are really saying, we don't have the numbers, but we got the money. And that's where they are able to leverage the influence, the power, and to get people like Americans to do their bidding. Someone else said that the Jews want to rule the world by proxy, and we're their big, sugar daddy, apparently.
We're doing it.
We're doing it.
They're doing it. I got a question. Monster Legend 27 said, ooh, Zionist. I got a question for you. What percentage of people do you think that are Zionist are true believers in the Zionist movement, or are just paid?
I don't know if I've ever met a true Zionist.
Really? Well, Mark Levin would be one.
Well, I don't think he was one till October 7th. In other words, he showed his other side after October 7th. But
So
before then, I thought he was an American.
Zionist.
I think I don't know how long you listened to Mark Levin, but I listened to him when I worked at WBT all throughout 2021.
Okay.
He was a rabid Zionist back then. No one was even talking about Israel back then. It wasn't even in the news hardly at all. And that's all he would talk about. He was a rabid Zionist beforehand. He's not a great example, but I know exactly what you're saying, where you do start to see this like turn in the perspective. And I'd say a true Zionist, how I would define it. I feel like that's also something, we did this on a different show where we should define anti-Semitism as well.
I see.
But a true Zionist, I would say someone like even Ken Ard and Dave Baker of Wake Up Carolina are a true Zionists because they support Israel. And that's really all that means to me.
I got you.
Now, I'm not saying they would at all costs. I'm not saying if Netanyahu came over here and murdered their families in front of them, then therefore they'd still be down with the cause. But like to support it based on the narrative that is being touted today, I'd say that's someone that is a true Zionist. Because they're not getting paid to support it. They support it because they do believe it.
Yeah.
Well, then the question I would also follow up with is how can you be a Zionist and American first? I don't think those two things are compatible.
I don't either. No, and people like Sean
America first defined as we define it.
Yes, right. And what is in the best interest of America? Probably not going to war with Iran, and be on the behest of Israel.
Yeah.
It's funny when you talk objectively, or you criticize Israel, or you disagree with a Jewish point of view, you're quite often talking about being anti-Semitic. I've often kind of turned that. I try to label myself as pro-gentilic. I'm not against Jews. I'm for Christians.
I prefer Christian. I think Christian just covers it.
I'm not. Well, that's true, but
yes.
I'm not against Canada, but I'm for America. And so I'm not even against England. I'm just for America, and so I refuse to be.
I'm not even anti-Israel. I'm not against Israel in itself. I'm just against where it's going and what it currently is.
Well, and the people who did not want Israel to have its own state, they predicted this back in the 40s.
Yeah,
They said if Israel gets their own a state then and their own military, they're just going to be the mouse that roared. And, we're seeing that come into fruition 75 years later.
Completely correct. They were.
And I think this is a good time to kind of bring up like what we mean by anti-Semitism. The title or the thumbnail talked about how there's an uprising in anti-Semitism in America,
which is eerily familiar to what's happened in other countries before, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But the title of this episode is tongue in cheek, because the three of us would actually say that's not true. Or at least what we mean is Jews are saying that there's a uprising in anti-Semitism in America, but the three of us would define anti-Semitism as specifically a irrational racial hatred towards Jews. Okay, so like Dr. Michael Brown, he's a Jewish biblical scholar who is he says he's a messianic Jew,
yeah.
or a Christian Jew. He is a Jewish person. He is ethnically Jewish, born and raised in a Jewish home, who converted to Christianity. He believes in Jesus. He's one of my favorite biblical scholars. He's very well educated on the subject, and he delves a lot into the Old Testament, kind of defending the Old Testament interpretation from Christians against the Jewish modern day interpretation. I don't have any problem with Dr. Michael Brown. He's a Jewish person. But what a lot of ethnic and especially religious Jews, like Rabbi Shmuley, there was another rabbi who debated Candace Owens. You know what Candace Owens is. And he defined anti-Semitism as something that has no definition. It's constantly changing. And that way they can say, well, the Jewish people, they belong to the land of Israel, the actual land, and they deserve to be there. But in order to be there, they have to neutralize all their enemies. And how do they neutralize all their enemies? They do it by using American aid, with American bombs, American jets, to exterminate all these other foreign enemies. Well, if you're not in support of that, well, then therefore you're not in support of the Jewish state. If you're not in favor of the Jewish state, therefore you're anti-Semitic. So for you to oppose us giving foreign aid to a foreign country, well, then therefore you despise the people. And that's the kind of leap in logic. See, they want to protect their own interests. And this is something Kennard says. He says he understands why they do what they do. I do as well. I understand why they are doing what they're doing, but I think it is immoral. And what they have to do is they have to define anti-Semitism. It's the same way you were saying, like with black people. They have to say, well, if you lock your car when I'm nearby, that's racist because you're afraid of me because of whatever. It's this paranoia. They're paranoid. And it has to do with a lot of history, which I understand. So that's why I think it's important to define anti-Semitism, because how we would define it is different than how they would define it.
But it takes two to tango. It's hard for me to believe that millions and millions of people throughout 2,000 years of history in almost every country in which Jews have lived are all wrong. I think until Jewish people say that we are somewhat contributory to the concept of anti-Semitism, until they take a little bit of ownership, it's not going to change, right? It's the definition of insanity. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've said as an academic. It's about time, just like, when the Pope said, not eating meat on Friday, that worked for a while. There were good reasons for that. But we don't have to do that anymore. And if someone could speak for the Jewish people and say, the chosen people, it was a good concept against the Hittites and the Canaanites, but the way the world is today, we're God's, we're one of God's favorite people, but we're not the only people. It's almost like they need to kind of come to terms with some sort of admission and not stick steadfastly to that belief that causes the anti-Semitism. If you got a little bit loosen up on your definition, maybe people wouldn't resent the superiority disposition that you take.
Well, I think that's largely the problem across the world with all cultures and all peoples, with the exception of the West, is that they don't hold each other accountable. There's no accountability in almost any other culture. You could argue Islam, but there's no real accountability in Judaism. None of the sub-Saharan African cultures, none of the East Asian cultures, they controlled by honor, not necessarily accountability, which is different. But when you look at this multiculturalism of the America that has been hoisted upon us, that's the issue. There is no accountability. They don't hold each other in group accountable. And so it's forced from the out group to hold them accountable, and that force from the out group to hold them accountable is by their definition anti-Semitic.
By
Right?
their definition.
By their definition. And that's the only one that matters because they control the narrative. They control the laws. They control everything that has to do with any type of enforcement of thought that comes along with it. Got a couple comments here. Ninja of Space said, fallacious argumentation has always just been a tool of besmirch opposition. Well, that's right. I mean, that's why they're all, not all of them. That's why most of them are lawyers, right? They wrote legalese. I'll give Stephen Miller a shout out, right? I mean, he's a Jew, but he is on our side, and he's the one that's playing this legalese game on our side. And honestly, that's about the only place that we've really won recently, because in the courts, on the law system, because we have a Jew fighting on our side because they wrote legalese. They speak legalese. I mean, it's just by their nature.
I can't separate my following of Jesus from my brain. In other words, if you're a lawyer, I want you to be a Christian lawyer. If you're an economist, I want you to be a Christian economist. In other words, you have to filter your brain through the heart and soul of Christianity. And so if you don't have those principles guiding you, then you're just using your brain. And isn't that what Jesus said when he came? He said, you guys are too legalistic. I want you to have agape love. Substitute love for laws. And if you believe in Jesus, you can't divorce those values from your thoughts or your writing or your laws.
He told them that they need to understand the spirit of the law and not the law itself, and that is exactly what legalism is.
Right.
They want to usurp the law, the spirit of the law, by defining the law in whatever legalese terms they feel like. And so these are their principles. That is what they base their entire foundation on. This is why you want to go to court with a Jewish lawyer.
Right.
If you want to win, that's what you have to do.
I think that's why they rejected Jesus as the Messiah.
That's exactly why. Well, that's why they freed Barabbas.
Messianic Jews, Jews for Jesus, Brown, Sid Roth, those people get it. They say, hey,
they're closer.
They're all right, but if you believe in Jesus, you get it, because we were on the wrong track until Jesus came to earth to say, hey, you guys are heading down the wrong direction. You know, it's not all about thoughts and words and laws. It's kind of about spirit. And I don't want anyone to write a law or to defend me in court and divorce themselves from the spirit of what Jesus tried to teach. It's just not complete. It's not whole. You can't be 80% head,
but
and 10%
It has
heart.
to do with the term Judeo-Christian values, because this is something that is commonly said amongst Christians, and the logic behind it is as well. You can trace Judaism's heritage back to the same stories as Christianity. Both Jews and Christians believe in Moses. They both believe in Abraham. They both believe in Adam and Eve. And so therefore our morality.
None of those were Jews.
Well, hold on, but it's besides the point. But none of the but it's to say that therefore our morality is the same. That is not true. I guarantee you, and I am putting words into people's mouth, but it is a Christian tenet to forgive our enemies. And therefore, I'll be specific. If Adolf Hitler asked for forgiveness, God would forgive him. Jesus would forgive him. Ask a rabbi the same thing. Is that a part of their faith? And I am putting words in their mouth. I would say they would say no.
No.
Well, they would obviously say no. I mean, it's been 70 years.
I would say modern Jews, it's 2 eyes for an eye, not 1 eye for an eye.
I mean, well, that's exactly correct. Look at October 7th. That's what we're facing right now.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's why we can kill 1,000 Gazans. It just saved 1 Jew, because they feel that's proportionate. And that's what Eisenhower said. You know, they don't
I think
see
Nixon,
things in the right
I
perspective.
think Nixon said it too. So he was on that same train,
You're exact.
which is why Watergate happened.
Eisenhower was his father-in-law, so yeah, he married his daughter, so that would make perfect sense. Sure.
They made too many movies to forgive Bad Mustache Man. This is, I mean, yeah. They run Hollywood and they influence media, and so people see the thing on the TV, and whatever's on the TV is true. It must be true, even if it's a fictional thing like Schindler's List, right? Based on a true story. Maybe.
You know what's so funny is like the fact that Hitler spoke German was like one of the best things that could have happened for that narrative in America. Because when you listen to when you see like him on TV, the speeches where he's like, like he's like speaking, like he sounds like crazy.
Yeah.
But you've probably seen these AI edits where they convert it into English.
And he sounds normal.
And it's like some of the things he's saying, because he's not, because like, you don't know what he's saying because you don't speak German. And so you think he's saying like these crazy,
Harsh.
disgusting, evil, goblin people. And then what he's saying is like, we want to control our own nation. Ever since World War I, our nation has been divided up and raped, and we want to be in charge of our own nation. And it's like, well, dang, that's kind of what I believe.
Well,
Germany first.
Germany first. Make Germany great again.
Well, I largely believe that is.
I know we're digging a very deep hole.
Well, the Hitler comparisons, here they come now, right?
I know. Yeah, we're not doing ourselves any favors. Sounds super based. Ninja of Spades says.
But yeah, I mean, I give the pattern of speech of German people a little bit of. I think that attributed to to what came about, right? They were the only ones to fight back. When you had the French, which is they're this lovey-dovey type thing, and they were just simply overrun, and they always have been. And I think there's a speech pattern that comes along with the mindset where you are able to fight back. And I think English is a little bit more rebellious than others. French is a little bit more lovey-dovey, and the German people are aggressive in their speech, and it shows. Now when we introduced you, Joe, you had written 2 articles. One was on biblical Babel.
Right. And one of them basically said, I make a sharp division between Judeo and Christian. There's a fork in the road. It's not Judeo-Christian highway. It's Judeo is going off north and south, and Christian is going off east and west. And especially since the Jews wrote the Old Testament, I think they wrote it very prejudicially. They wrote it to make themselves in the starring role, and not just the starring role, but the exclusive role. And I think when Christ came to change that narrative, they rejected him.
I think the Masoretic text definitely does that because it was essentially rewritten. I'm not saying that it is wrong necessarily, but it is put into a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Septuagint doesn't do that, right? Everybody spoke Greek. That's what the original Old Testament was written in primarily. And so I think there's a lot of people working on reconverting the Septuagint into English and trying to make it a pure text rather than the Masoretic text, the Old Testament that we have now. So I think there's a lot coming in the near future about that. So that's something that you might need to look into when it gets here.
I continually need to update my thinking, so that's one of the reasons I'm friends with someone 50 years younger than me because I'm open to any ideas that come my way. But another
you're a rare breed.
Another thing we don't think about is that a lot of the books in the Bible were not included. They're finding new books that were deliberately excluded by both Christians and Jews because they didn't tell the narrative that the church wanted to promote. And so, there's going to be some new information that we may uncover in those lost chapters as well.
Well, so, I think a lot of them were because they were later inventions. There were, and I don't know which specific ones you're talking about, but
like the Book of Enoch.
The Book of Enoch.
Enoch was the one that comes to mind, exactly.
Yeah, that was a later invention.
Arguably. I don't know what the first book was. I know 2 and 3 were for sure. But that's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's
So do
Another day.
you accept the Apocrypha as a Catholic?
What's the Apocrypha?
The Apocrypha?
That's the books in the Catholic
Maccabees,
Bible. Yeah,
Jubilees.
Again, like I admitted right up front, I am certainly not the biblical scholar.
Okay.
We had catechism, we didn't have Bible study. So
Right.
I really am not good with chapter and verse.
That's the problem, Catholics. We gotta study our Bible.
That's why we've been rejected.
there is
I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, I know, but yeah.
because Zeb, I know you and I. Oh shoot, what's his name? The guy, the debate guy. You always you like.
Corey J. Mahler.
Mahler, yeah. You know, we talk about how a hierarchical government is a more godly form of government because God's, you know, like the systems he created are hierarchical.
Right.
And there is something, though I'm not a Catholic myself, I do get the appeal.
Oh, for sure I do.
Yeah. Now there's doctrinal things that I just can't wrap
my
I just can't
issue
bring
is
myself to believe.
primarily with the infallibility of it.
Of the Pope.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like I've heard Catholics say like, because like I define infallibility as like sinless, or maybe not sinless, but like that he can do no wrong. Like he is supposed to be almost like not like Jesus, but he is supposed to be like a direct conduit of God, like God's voice on earth. Yet the popes disagree with it. We don't need to get off into a Catholic Protestant debate because I'm also not one of these like proud Protestants. I attended a Catholic service just to see what it was like, see what all the hubbub was about.
Yeah, it's basically just that he doesn't make human mistakes.
Popes have too much incoherency to be infallible. Vatican I and II alone.
We're not gonna. I'm not gonna make Joe.
We don't want to.
Yeah,
we don't want to we don't want to throw you under the bus here, Joe, defending the Catholic.
Yeah, because
faith.
then anti-Catholicism will make anti-Semitism look minor, right?
Right.
So you wrote Biblical Babel,
yeah,
and then where you kind of discuss the separation of Judeo and Christian. You also wrote
The Government of Judaism.
Yeah, The Government of Judaism.
Right, and that's where I kind of talked a little bit about how the Jewish people recognized very early on that by leveraging money that they could have much more power than their numbers would suggest. That a dollar equals 10 votes, so to speak. So they naturally gravitated toward areas of influence because. And what I kind of did is I kind of contrasted Jews with like Mormons and Mennonites and folks like that. Why is it that the Mormons, who do well financially and are an unusual group of folks compared to the mainstream Christianity,
unusual.
Why is it they don't try to control things, and why isn't there anti-Mormonism? And the Mennonites, they kind of keep to themselves. I mean, they think they're right. They think you shouldn't go beyond 8th grade. You shouldn't use electricity. You shouldn't drive a car. But they don't try to impose that on anybody else. So governments try to impose values on groups of people, usually geographical territory. And what I said is Judaism acts like a government in the sense that they gather this money, they gather this power, and they try to have things their own way. So they really do act like a government outside of Israel.
That sounds very conspiratorial.
Like a mafia.
That's me.
Like a mafia.
And I actually,
like a mob.
I actually mentioned the mafia in a sense of self-embarrassment. Yes, I'm not very proud of my Italian mafia heritage.
Jew?
Pardon me?
So you're an Italian Jew?
No, I'm just a non-mafia Italian. Sometimes I wish I could have mafia connections. Unfortunately, I don't. But yet, I've been lumped in. You talk about anti-Semitism. I mean, I have been lumped in with the New York greaser Italians. I've been lumped in with the mafia Italians. And so I kind of know a little bit about, that sensitivity of discrimination. My mother suffered it a lot more than I did. But, not everyone thinks that Italians a lot of people think Italians are only New York Italians, so it's like forget about it, that kind of Italian. So I've had to overcome that so I can identify with anti-Semitism.
Well, you talk about this government that they have outside of Israel, and they obviously do. I mean, this is obvious, and anyone that denies this is delusional or ignorant. But they don't assimilate, and we're speaking specifically about America. But you have factions that are in Florida that I can think of right now. Obviously, everywhere else, New York, but. I think about the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro. They moved their entire operation to Tennessee. Mm-hmm. But Ben Shapiro didn't stay in Tennessee. You know why? He admitted why he didn't stay in Tennessee, because they don't have a Jewish community. And so he literally left his foundational business that was essentially controlling the entire narrative of the right, of the conservatives, and moved to Florida where he can be in a Jewish community. Right. And so how do you make the argument that Ben Shapiro is assimilated and those in his Jewish community are assimilated when they quite literally leave the West as it is, hide into their little communities, and essentially are parasites on the local community and the nation as a whole?
Well, I mean, I think they just want to cherry pick the aspects of society that work to their benefit and work to their advantage and further their narrative. They don't want to participate in things that don't continue to advance their agenda.
You mean like the military?
Like the military, yeah, sure, for one. Very underrepresented in the American military.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be a good thing to look at. Hey, let's take this 2% population and look at what they're overrepresented in and what they're underrepresented in, and then let's try to come to a conclusion of what their intent is for the thing.
And I don't have a lot of demographics, but I do know that 50% of American Jews are worth $1 million or more, and 1/2 of all the billionaires in America are Jewish. In my article, I referenced American pro sports teams. The preponderance of American Jewish family ownership among American sports teams is unbelievable. I mean, the NFL, the NBA, MLB, the National Hockey League. If you just want to look at those names, like in media, you'll find the same 80% percentage that you find. 4 out of 5 is 80%, if my math is right. It's probably 80% among sports teams. So when two teams are playing in the Super Bowl, we don't know which team is going to win, but a Jewish team is going to win. A Jewish-owned team is going to win.
I have some guys working on my bathroom, right? They're doing trade work. And my question is, have you ever seen a Jewish trade worker?
I have not. And my father
so this
was
is my
a tradesman.
argument that, Jesus was a son of a carpenter. Was Joseph Jewish? Something to think about, guys. No, just kidding. Go ahead.
No, but... my dad, but I will tell you this. Now that you mention this, I hadn't thought about this in about 40 years. My dad was a carpenter, and he hung out with plumbers and electricians and stuff. There were a few Jewish carpenters that were refugees from Lithuania or Ukraine. When Ukrainian and Lithuanian Jews had to escape the persecution at that point, after World War II, some of them were tradesmen, because my dad had a couple of Jewish friends. And it's interesting.
Did they stay tradesmen long?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was it. But the thing that's kind of ironic is my dad had no prejudice against Jewish carpenters, but he did have prejudice against Italian plumbers. Because the Italian plumbers would come in and hack up all the wood to put their pipes in. So their discrimination was against other trades, not other religions or other ethnicities.
Well, and that's something I want to be very clear about. And I'll use I'm not trying to change subjects or anything. I'm only using this as an example. But it's one of those things like, we're not bringing this up to draw attention to a certain group so that they can be persecuted. It's to draw attention to subversion within our own country, and to understand that this is no way a hateful message. In the same way, and I'll use this like I know Zeb does, and I'm sure you've heard about the young man. There was an incident recently where a young white football player was stabbed in the heart by a young black schoolmate. I don't exactly know their connection.
Yep.
And what we're saying is so like since then, the father of the young man who was killed, he came out and he forgave the young man, the young black man who killed his son. And in a Christian sense, that's very, very noble. And in a lot of ways, I do respect it.
We haven't had this
hold on.
discussion,
Yeah,
have
yeah,
we?
yeah. We'll get to it. But like in a lot of ways, I respect it as a Christian, but that doesn't negate the fact that the murderer needs to be held accountable. Forgiveness does not mean relief from punishment, relief from judgment. And that is what we are saying here about this is we see this subversion and these changes in narrative in our own country. We're not allowed to support our own interest because that would go against the interest of other people. And Jews, rightly enough, they're paranoid about this because it goes against their interest. So I want to be very clear, what we are advocating for is not persecution, but rather we want our own interest to be put first, America first.
Right. It's
and
not,
we need to recognize the subverters. That's what this is about.
right. It's not envy. It's not hate. It's simply love. It's love for my family, my nation, my state.
Yes.
And,
It is. I do not hate Ben Shapiro. If Ben Shapiro said the best thing for his family was for my family to move out of my house and let his family live there, it is not hateful for me to say I'm not going to do that.
Right. And really what I have said in my writings in the 2 chapters and specifically the articles is that I'm kind of reaching out to my Jewish brethren to say, hey guys, you know, the same thing hasn't been working. Why not try something else? Just like Donald Trump is trying some big swings, some radical approaches to, you know, fixing certain economic factors in the United States. Well, if you want to put a stop to anti-Semitism, if you want to not let another version of what's happened throughout history in Spain and Germany and other places, why not approach it a little differently? Why not say, you know what, as Jews, we are not completely ignorant or innocent from anti-Semitism. We must be contributing some factors. And if I was circumspect enough, can I look at maybe what I'm doing wrong so that people disagree with, or what I'm doing wrong that people don't like? Let me take a little ownership of anti-Semitism and maybe change my narrative in the 21st century in America. And I think despite the Pope's infallibility or fallibility, you know, at least the Pope can speak with one voice and say, you know, forgive each other, or, you know, love each other, or do this. And I think one of the problems with the Jewish people is that they're so individual, there really isn't anyone to speak for the culture. Maybe rabbis can speak for the religion, but I think a lot of us would say we don't have problem with religious Jews. We may have more problems with cultural Jews. Everyone's free to practice their religion, but when you see an Orthodox man on 45th Street in New York City making $1 million selling diamonds, it's kind of like, how religious is that, or how business capitalistic is that? You know, I see a disconnect between religion and capitalism from an Orthodox Jew who's a diamond merchant. And so that's why I would say it's more of a cultural Judaism that people reject more than a religious Judaism.
Yeah, it's kind of like why we say the solution to immigration is not to give all the people that came here illegally amnesty and then just, you know, with a red stamp, turn them all into Americans. That's the problem with them being here isn't just because they came here legally. It's because they're changing the nature of our society, of our civilization, of America. They are not American. They are Hispanic. They are Mexican. They're Venezuelan, whatever. And they're coming here and they're not assimilating at all. You told the story of your grandfather, how he came here and he made it a point to learn English, how he said, I think that Italian is a much more beautiful language than English, but I have come here to America and I want to do my best to become an American. That is not what these immigrants are doing. And in the same way, I think it's safe for us to say, if overnight, well, maybe not overnight, but if one day, if like a descendant of mine, if like my great grandchild were to wake up and they could trace their ancestry back to the founding of this nation, or to my side of the family, which immigrated here after World War II from Holland. If they were to wake up one day and realize, wait a minute, every single one of our elected leaders is Chinese, that seems weird. We're American. Why? And like they have an allegiance to China. They have a little China pin on their suit, and they're the president of the United States, and they're the ones donating to all the campaigns. It's not anti-Chinese to say, as an American, that's kind of strange, and I'm not okay with that. Whoa. What are you, racist? What, do you hate Chinese people? You don't think they're smart? You don't think they're qualified to run the nation? It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that America is a people. America is more than just living on the land. And as an American, I want my nation and the nation that my children and grandchildren will grow up in to remain American and be run by people like me who can look at my children and see their own children in them. That's who I want to run our country.
You sound like a Nazi right now, making a blood and soul argument.
No, you're just saying that the American spirit, just like the Christian spirit trumps the American this Christian body, the American spirit seems to trump whether your grandfather came from Italy or your grandfather came from Holland, right? My grandfather used to say, "When in Rome, New York, do what the Romans do." So, he bought into that. And it's kind of funny. He felt that the British were a little bit arrogant. The Southern Europeans kind of rubbed Northern Europeans the wrong way. But there wasn't like a word for anti-Anglican. Like there's a word anti-Semitic. There wasn't anti-Anglican or anti-French or anti.
Right. It's the only word that exists like itself.
Yeah, and that's why
there's not even anti-African. There's just racist. The same word applies to Asians, to African, whoever.
Yeah.
Well, didn't the word anti-Semitism wasn't it invented in like the 50s?
I don't know. We got anti-white now, so that works.
But aren't the Palestinians Semite people? That's what's interesting.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, they're Semitic as well. So it's really anti-Jewish, not more than anti-Semitic.
Right. Well, that's correct.
Yeah.
But they want to claim they want to claim to be Semitic, or the only Semitic people. Semite goes back to Shem, Noah's sons, and so the Semites would be a large swath of people, and not just Jews. And they want to co-opt that term, and they have, because they control the flow of information.
And you know what, they could have it because like we were saying earlier when we defined how we define anti-Semitism as compared to how a Jewish person would define anti-Semitism, they've kind of, in the same way like your average black person today has kind of run the term racist into the ground. It's racist to have the air conditioner too low. In the same way they said it's anti-Semitic to read your Bible in public. There was a caller in the Wake Up Carolina, how he talked about how in the HOA, there was a Jewish woman in the HOA who tried to get rid of Christmas decorations in their neighborhood because, well, I'm Jewish and that offends me. Are we is it anti-Semitic to say, I'm a Christian, I'm going to put up Christmas decorations. I kind of don't care about your sensibilities. What about my sensibilities?
Right. And in most situations, majorities rule. That's the thing. If you're 98% of the population, and normally you would have your way, that's what's so incredible about 2% of the population having 25% of the money. And then when you have 25% of the money, you have 50% of the influence and 50% of the power. So that's amazing how 2% can kind of magnify up into 50% of anything, really.
Mm-hmm.
I thought y'all were going to have a little back and forth on what is an American a second ago, but you didn't take the bait, Josh.
I didn't take the bait because I don't want to get too. I mean, do we want to get into that, or do we want to stick on the?
Well, I mean, we can kind of get into it a little bit. Because Josh made the point of the HOA lady. It's like, is she American? Like, would you call a Jew that wants to stop someone from reading the Bible out in public American?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so, and that's an ideological basis. But I would argue that it is in someone's nature to do that. And so if we are to retain America as American, it must be what the founding stock of America was, at least a vast, vast majority, a super majority. And so any income, regardless of values, any incoming immigration, regardless of value, is an invasion and a watering down or a disenfranchisement of the American people. And so that eventually becomes America isn't American. Does that make sense? And so we define American as a nation in itself.
And are you kind of basing that on
nation of people.
constitutional foundation, the things that
I'm basing it on a nationalistic perspective, almost from an ethnicity basis.
What Zeb and I are saying is ethnicity and race does not play no factor in your ideology. And the point being is Zeb and I disagree on J.D. Vance, and I think you and I do too. I'm not a big fan of J.D. Vance. If I had my pick in who Donald Trump's vice president would be, I would have picked Dr. Ben Carson. I like Dr. Ben Carson a lot. He's a very devout Christian man. He's very honorable. He's very smart, and he's black. Like, I don't have any problem with him because of that. And so if you were to say, if the entire nation of America, if every white person in America were replaced with a Dr. Ben Carson, would it still be America? And we can kind of rack our brains about that. But my point, and like Zeb, Zeb would come right out. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Zeb would come right out and say no. And I would say, well, Dr. Ben Carson, he to me, he is an American. But the point is that would never happen. We would say it is logistically and statistically impossible to bring that many people of African-American descent into becoming a Dr. Ben Carson. It is in the same way, it's like, you see basically like modern medicine was essentially invented by white people. Not every white person is a doctor. In the same way, you can get a Dr. Ben Carson, but not every black person is a Dr. Ben Carson. In the same way, if you import, like you can bring a Hispanic person from Mexico over here. And if you do it one at a time, you can almost force assimilate them. But when you do it 10 million at a time, they're not going to do it. And even your grandfather or father, I think it was your grandfather. Your grandfather. If he had come over here with 10 million people just like him, would he have felt the need to become an American?
I would even say 10,000.
No, no. And as it was, he was part of an Italian neighborhood.
Exactly.
But not everyone in that Italian assimilated. As a matter of fact, sociologically speaking, Italians are one of the more clannish people. They are harder to assimilate. But my grandfather thought for himself.
You say that sociologically. Do you attribute that to genetics?
I'm not sure of all the reasons. I think it's more of a cultural phenomenon. But I will say this, that my grandfather's first cousin was in the boat behind him. And when he got to Ellis Island, they said, "We're full up." They sent his boat down to Buenos Aires, Argentina. So they came in
with Hitler.
Ooh, the Italians came in under controlled numbers and controlled circumstances. So even though he was in an Italian neighborhood, some of the Italians went to college, some went to the mafia, some went into the trades, and so I attribute his value system of wanting to be American. That contributed a lot to my family's success, because even though he might have disagreed with some, because in some ways I think the American culture that you're talking about, that American spirit, is white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. And the further you get away from that, the fewer of those letters you have, the harder it is. And so, I think if you're a black person who's, acts like an American WASP, it's easier, like Ben Carson. If you're an Italian person who acts like a WASP, it's easier, like me. My cousin Freddie, who was more of the mafioso type, he used to call me cottage. It's not an Oreo cookie. I was a cottage cheese cannoli. So I was Italian on the inside, but white on the outside. So he didn't think too much of my choices of assimilating.
And what's kind of funny about that is it's like you would argue that kind of rhetoric comes from a more racist time. But
I didn't take it that way.
But yeah, that's exactly my point. Is that a problem? If I didn't grow up in that time, but people kind of poking fun at each other for their stereotypes. Is it that big a deal?
Actually,
as long as it's in good fun.
Well, among men, it was almost the way you expressed affection.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it's so funny. I was talking to an old college roommate of mine, and we had a friend, Bob Majkowski. He was Polish, right? So he came up the stairs one day in our house at the beach, and he said, "Hey, Joe, how'd your day go?" I said, "Who you calling a dago, you dumb Polak?" He apologized for 10 years after that. "Joe, I would never call you a dago. I never made anything about it." But yet,
is it an Italian slur?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah. That's the kind of slur that would make my mom cry. So it was like the N word it was like the N word for Italians.
But I also think that's a male female sensibility. Like I've got a good friend of mine who is morbidly obese. And I called it, he called me on the phone one day and I was with my family and I said, "Oh, I'm glad to hear that your heart didn't give out, fat ass." and my mom freaked out. She's like, "He has a problem. Why do you?" And it's like, because he laughed at it, because we both we both it's guys, we poke fun at each other. And the race thing, nowadays you're kind of walking on eggshells because you don't know how someone's going to take it if they're going to stab you in the heart.
The skins have gotten really thin. But it's kind of is what it is.
You're looking at me for.
You're the one in the Marines.
Yeah, you're the
one in the Marines. You're telling me in the Marines you guys were patting each other in the back of the Marines.
Oh, we had we called them dark green Marines most of the time.
That's pretty good.
The demographics were white, black, and a significant amount of Mexicans or Hispanic.
I was gonna say you never said significant or something like that.
Oh yeah,
of course.
Well, yeah. Well, I tell you what. So I was in sniper.
Hispanics are really good natured about it.
Yeah, they are.
They're really funny about it.
And so I was a scout sniper in a sniper platoon, and there was no blacks. If you see a scout sniper, they're literally unicorns. That's what they call them. They call them unicorns.
If you had a black sniper?
Yes. I've met one. And so that's what they called them. And they are willing to take the verbal abuse just as we are. I mean, it goes back and forth. And when you get in a more tight-knit community like that, the division is less, but it is amplified because you're able to kind of joke about more minute things in a larger sense.
And I'm sure athletes in locker rooms do that as well. "Hey guys, I just got an emergency text that I got to pick up my son.
We'll close it up.
Can I excuse myself and you guys finish up? Would that
Go
be
for it.
copacetic?
Thank you for coming by. Thank you for
thank you.
Sorry.
discussion.
No.
We've been going a while, haven't we? Hour and a half.
I'll be
Let's
honest,
go.
I completely forgot you had to go.
My son, there's something every day.
Every day.
And also, I know you're from New York, but the way you say "my son," you sound like Foghorn Leghorn. So the Southern culture has worn off on you a little bit.
I've been in the South longer than the North.
Fair enough.
Guys,
Yeah.
I'll talk to you soon.
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you, Joe.
If anybody would like to, go check out Dr. Joe Aniello on YouTube. If you're here, Dr. Joe Aniello.
Aniello.
That's how you spell it.
When
I can
the
never
first
spell
time-
his name.
the
Dude,
first
I spell
time I
his name
saw
wrong
his
every
name-
single time.
When I saw his name written down and I introduced him on the air, I was like, "We have Joe Aniello," and he was like, "That's not even close." And I was like, cut me some slack.
He's come a long way, man. Joe's come a long way, at least from what I can tell. We still got a little bit more ways to get him. I think we might have moved the needle a little bit today, Josh.
I think so too, and that's what I like about Joe. And we talked about this off the air the other day, where Joe he's a rare soul in the sense he's very open minded and willing to learn, but he's also, because of that, he's accrued a lot of knowledge. And honestly,
how old is Joe? Like 70?
He's 73,
72,
which
73?
I'll be honest, I would have guessed in his 60s, but like 73, I was like, you're 73?
Getting old, dude. Getting old.
But he doesn't look it. I mean, he's got the salt and pepper beard going on, but like he's still got color in his hair. Some of the Italians, they really hang in there. Yeah. Ninja of Space says he looks younger. I totally agree. He does not seem 73 years old.
Yeah. I mean, maybe to kind of recap of where we are. I'm gonna relax a little bit.
It's so funny because I know we were really tiptoeing around the JQ subject, and it was kind of like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble at my job, that kind of thing. And then you're like, all right, Josh, take us away. And then like that first 30 minutes, I was thinking to myself, I was like, Zeb, are you gonna jump in here?
Well, you just kept going, dude.
I didn't know because I was intentionally.
Josh
I was
mad
trying
at me
to
for
direct
interrupting, and then when I don't interrupt, he gets mad at me. So it's like
I was kind of like,
letting you go, dude. You were going. I was letting you go.
Admit it. Like I thought there were some good moments in there, but I was like,
they're gonna let you go anyway, Josh. It's just a matter of time.
That's true. I may as well fire up the old resignation letter right now.
Don't joke about it. They'll do it.
I know, man.
But yeah, I mean, I thought we had a good discussion.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I wish we had kind of game planned a little bit more because I feel like the beginning was a little all over the place. But
nobody wanted to touch the thing. Don't touch it. Don't touch the thing. I'm surprised we didn't get a notification that said your YouTube has stopped streaming.
But I think it is important to note though, because and I thought about bringing this up, but we didn't.
I don't think we said anything.
No. But I mean, like I've become, since getting my Saturday morning show, ultra sensitive to this because I knew, I work for a radio station and it's run by Jewish guys. And so I knew, like, obviously I have to tiptoe around the subject. And it was basically on my very first show, someone had called in and asked me something about Israel. And I just said something along the lines of, I was like, well, I mean, I don't think it's our obligation to support them at all costs. And I got the call. I got and every time it's come up, and it came up in a very well, I think it's okay to exercise a little restraint. Got the call, got reprimanded, and I'm like, so clearly I can't, I'm not on the show, I'm not allowed to talk about it at all. So I don't, because I want to keep my job for now.
Well, you're welcome here to say whatever you want to, Josh.
So it's if they see it.
I can't guarantee you a show next week, though.
Yeah,
but,
I can't. I
can't imagine there would be some Jews running a community.
All right. Let's not poke the bear any further.
An information station. But yeah, I think Joe's coming around.
Admittedly,
some of the older guys are coming around. But this is a new topic, a revolutionary topic, if you will, and quite frankly, you can't really trust anyone over the age of 40. Even as much as I like Joe, this is a youth movement, and it's going to be that way.
And it is nice to know that there's some people of Joe's age range that get it.
Yeah.
But it is true. It's one of those. What's that expression? If a intelligent man argues with a fool, who really is the fool? You know what I'm talking about? I
literally did I did a discussion last night on something along those lines. It was
I caught a little bit of it, and I totally forgot that's what it was about.
If you're following a fool, who's really the fool? You following him or the fool himself? Does that make sense?
Is that how it goes? Because I always thought it was if you argue with a fool, you're a bigger fool. And that's kind of how I hope my grandparents aren't watching this, but my grandma, she's a total Israel like supporter. She buys the whole spiel, you know, she buys it all, and she gets on me whenever I talk about it. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think I'm ever gonna convince you. So why
Yeah,
bother?
that's the one I was thinking about. Don't argue with an idiot; they'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience.
And it's not even like there's smart people. Like it's the idea that just because someone is smart, therefore they're always unbiased. A smart person at the end of the day is a person. Their entire worldview is formulated in their youth. And is near impossible for anybody, myself included, you included. By the time we're old, we'll probably be still talking about like the Trump movement in the same way they talk about Ronald Reagan. I'm gonna do our best. I'm gonna do our best not to. But the thing is our perspective is always informed by our experience, and your brain calcifies by the time you're 25.
Calcified. Did you watch the video I did with Joe?
Yeah. The touch grass video?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was good. It was great.
We kind of talked about, you mentioned something in there and you kept talking. I kind of forgot about it. That's why I interrupt you all the time. But, what did you say? We talked about it in touch grass. Oh, well, anyway.
Was it convincing people, arguing with boomers, how you mature and your reverence of smart people? I'm running through like what I just said.
Yeah. The personal bias of people.
There we go.
So we kind of talked about that, where you have to recognize that you have biases, and the people that are able to adjust based on that are the ones that get it, and the ones that you can have a conversation with. Those are the good faith guys. The ones that want to deny their bias, they're bad faith and do not deserve discussion.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
No,
and I kind of like that comment.
Till death. That's too calcified.
Well, I do think that the like in the same way, I think that like a lot of like, you know, we were talking about race a second ago. I think like tribalism and racism is inherent in all people. Like people pretend that's not true, but it is. And I think to say that the only way to get around that is through Christ is true. And I think the only way that one can truly be changing or not changing, but like not set in their ways is to be Christian, which in a way is being set in your ways, but it's being set in not your way, but the way, in God's way. And that's kind of what I take from that guy's comment where he says, nah, image bearers can develop till death. And develop in what way? Develop to become less sinful. That's the kind of development we want.
Josh still needs a little bit of brain development. He believes in evolution, so we'll get there. Dude, I texted you last night, dude. I was laying in bed at like 12 o'clock, and it just smacked me in the face because I kept thinking of like simplicity. I can't even think of it right now. What did I text you last night?
The
irreducible complexity.
Yeah.
Dude, I could not think of that yesterday to save my life.
You'll like this. My girlfriend, she came by work today and we hung out for a bit while I was working, and she watched the entire episode yesterday, and she was like, oh, I like this. And obviously I agree with Zeb on evolution. I was like, hey, I understand.
Well, you know, but it's okay for her to be right, you know.
For once. What was I going to, I said something to her that I was like, oh, I should have said that to Zeb. Kind of like how you were with the irreducible mind. Irreducible complexity.
Well, Joe mentioned earlier, he was talking about how and I wanted to kind of push back on this too. I'm doing it without him being here, but genetics mutation don't generate information.
That's what you said yesterday.
Yeah. I like Ninja. I don't know who he is, but you know, good job, dude. Let's go. He's the one in the comments on the other ones defending me for the South.
So before you say something, I just want to say this on the evolution thing real quick, just to keep in mind for when we talk about it. Because this is what I said to my girlfriend today, was basically, I don't know any of the evidence or like all of the arguments in favor of evolution, because my point of view is that evolution does not contradict Scripture. So whether evolution is true or not true makes no difference to me. I haven't tried to prove evolution to myself because it doesn't matter to me. I haven't tried to disprove evolution because it doesn't matter to me. It matters to me if it's incompatible with the Bible, so I'd rather debate that.
The only way I think you can make evolution not contradictory to Christianity or the Bible is that you stretch it out over time, and God is directly involved the entirety of it until the creation of Adam. If humans evolved, at what point did humans develop status? Yeah, image bearer.
So
this is the same thing.
Can you pull that quote up from the comments? So if humans evolved, at what point did humans develop the status of image bearer of God, bearing God's image? God made us. Hello? God made us in his image. If we was Kangs, then it insinuates God was incomplete. So very funny, by the way. But I'll answer this question. I would say what it means to bear the image of God does not have to do with our physical structure, does not have to do with the fact that we have 10 toes, 10 fingers, 2 arms, 2 eyes. I don't think that's what it means when it says we bear the image of God. I also don't think it has to do with our level of intelligence, because angels and demons are more intelligent than we are. But they are not made in the image of God. I think what this means, as he said, to be the image, because what it says, I forget the exact quote, but it's like to be the bearers of God's image on earth, meaning to be basically in the same way angels are God's messengers to us. We are the bearers of God's image on this earth. Genesis calls us to basically like run the earth in God's name. Maybe you can pull up scripture so I have it down perfectly. But in the same way, it's like, is someone who is born without arms and legs, are they not in the image of God? Is God's image incomplete because they're born with a deformity? I would say no. So he says, consciousness, moralities, our bodies are inextricably linked to our spirit, hence being given new bodies. So I assume when you say hence us being given new bodies in the new millennium, you're talking about how we will be given new bodies in the millennium. I do agree that our souls and our bodies are interlinked, but I don't think it has to do with the physical structure of our bodies. That's what I'm saying. Well, it doesn't actually have to do with our DNA.
He's saying new bodies isn't a spiritual body, as Jesus.
A transformed and glorified body.
Yes.
I'm failing to see how that contradicts what I'm saying. So I would say consciousness and morality are not what it means to be in the image of God. Or not necessarily, because we have a sense of morality. I think if you are a Christian, you are bearing God's image. Like man was called to bear God's image. Called, not inherently. So like a non-Christian who is human, who has 10 fingers, 10 toes, is not carrying God's image.
That's a take. That's a take. I don't know if that's correct, Josh.
Because I know it says man was created in God's image, male and female, he created them. And maybe you can pull it up. I don't remember. I'm not quoting it exactly. Excuse me. Our structures establish our capacity. Portions of our brain control various emotive, motor, or moral issues. Okay. So the thing is if you equate God's image to solely morality, I mean, everyone has a sense of morality, but not everyone has the Christian sense of morality. So just because we have a sense of morality, I mean, I definitely believe the Word of God. The Word of God is written on the hearts of all men. We definitely have a sense of morality for a reason. But certain animals have a sense of morality. Dolphins and whales, they feel great emotion when they lose their children. They know not to kill their children. They have a sense of morality and a certain level of sense of justice as well.
I'm
But
gonna
also
have to
with
look-
consciousness is a baby a proper image of God when it doesn't have a fully formed sense of identity, when it, you know, like when it's not at a certain developmental level. Is someone who is autistic, are they not made in the image of God?
That's a take, dude. I'm gonna have to look into that one. I've never heard that. That only Christians are image bearers.
Yes, I think that when it says man was created, because think about it,
He's
it's
specifically talking about Adam.
It's talking about Adam and Eve before the fall,
Correct.
to be God's image on the earth. But
That's
then
a
there was the
position.
fall.
I'll have to look
So
into that one.
non-Christian, not like, you know, non-Christians today, it would be different back then. But
That would make arguments a lot easier, or some arguments a lot easier to make.
there you go. So you're coming around. You're coming around.
I'm
Take
already
note.
there. I just never heard the argument before. We need a foundational basis to make the argument from now on.
That's why, like, all this headcanon and personal interpretation killing y'all. Well, I mean, that's your personal interpretation and headcanon.
Dude, that's all I do is headcanon.
I do admit, as you do, certainly politically, we have unpopular views, but we're trying to make them popular.
Well, that's what we're doing. That's why I say crazy things into a camera, and get a bunch of Yankees mad at me, so Ninja can go defend me in the comments section.
Am I a Yankee?
What I say is what I believe to be true, and if I am not correct on this thing, someone can bring it up, and if I'm wrong, I'll change my position. I would rather be right than continue into incorrect interpretation or incorrect ideas or incorrect opinions. I'm perfectly willing to change my position if I am wrong. And so because of that, I believe I am right, which most people do. Most people believe they're right on the things, right, Josh? Otherwise, why would you hold that position if you don't believe yourself to be right?
Yeah, I hate that. Like, that's something like my.
Oh, you think you're right? You think
Yeah,
you're right
it's like,
about
well,
everything?
you're only
Yes,
saying that
yes,
because you
I
think
do.
you're right. Yeah, everyone does that. You're saying you're saying what people are. Like, that's just saying, well, it's like you're fighting, you're defending yourself from me because you want to live. It's like, yeah, no shit. What do you think I'm talking about here? So Ninja of Space says, look into the early church fathers. You know, the guys that canonized and wrote the books. Whoa, what are you,
He's
Catholic?
Orthodox.
What?
He's Orthodox.
Oh, he
remember?
is Orthodox. Okay, well, I can't call you out on that because he was bashing the Pope a minute ago. So I thought maybe he was a Protestant, but
Yeah, I mean, I've
That's
read
I have a
not
lot of-
all of the early church fathers. Again, this is a comment I made the other day. Is there's an issue with teaching history and church fathers in Protestantism, and I would agree with you.
I
on
would
that.
agree with that. But again,
Oh, you weren't here for that. That was last night. He was on the live stream last night.
was he in the comments last night, or was he
Was
the
he?
guy you were debating?
Yeah.
Because
No, he was in the
I
comments.
tuned in for like 5 minutes.
He was in the comments last night. Dude, I'll bring him on if you want to jump on. We can get him on here for sure.
Yeah. This is like the Josh Vandernoort show on Live 95. All you need to do is participate, and then you can come be a guest on the show. That's how you and I got introduced.
Dude, we're just trying to get ideas out there, man. Get people involved. That's where we need to go. We got to get people involved, dude, because everybody's been Seinfeld watchers for so long. And that's how we got in this position. Everybody just moving through life as it is, being busy doing work. I'm just doing work so much, I don't have the time to go vote. I'm doing work so much, I don't have time to do anything outside of provide for my family and eat and sleep. And that's it.
So is he not Orthodox? He says not yet.
Yeah. He said he's a Baptist. He's not Orthocatechumen. What's that? can't even
I was going
pronounce
to
it.
ask you, is
He's technically a
ortho-
Baptist. I don't think he's catechized yet. I think that's what he meant to say.
catechumen?
Catechumen.
Once we saw Seinfeld without the laugh track, which I'm going to be honest, because I like Curb Your Enthusiasm. Seinfeld, I don't find funny.
I don't watch TV. I've never watched either one of those.
I forget you're your autistic.
I watched
history.
I
Only.
watched Wild Boys growing up, dude. That's what we watched.
You watch
we
Marvel movies. You
we
got
watched-
Groot all over the place over there.
Oh, we do. Oh, yeah. I do watch Marvel movies. Not anymore since they ruined it after Captain Marvel. But, yeah, we used to watch Wild Boys, and then we'd go outside and do whatever they did, or
Dukes of Hazzard.
Jackass, Bam Margera. Those are fun. Those videos. Josh, I think we had a stream today. We did have one.
We certainly did.
Ninja,
We'll
thank you
have
for tuning in.
Hopefully, I still have a job.
We'll
We
put
will.
It, put it on props so nobody
Because
can see it.
Joe and I were talking walking in, and he goes, "Are you going to get in trouble for this one?" I'm like, "I probably would if they watched it, but they don't even listen to my show, and it's on their platform. So I highly doubt they're taking the time to comb through our racist, anti-Semitic YouTube channel."
Words don't have any meaning anymore. We're just saying the things that are obvious, man. And if they can't recognize that and adjust off of it, or either retort, that's the problem. They have to shut you down because you're right. Because you're right. And so here we are. They racist. Yeah. Sure. Whatever. I know words don't mean anything anymore.
That came up on the screen, and I was like, "What does that mean?" And then when you said it, I was like,
That's
"There we
racist.
go." That's racist.
But yeah, Josh, pretty good stream today.
I liked it.
Joe did pretty well.
Joe did great.
He's got a lot to say. Again, check out his YouTube if you're around. Dr. Joe Aniello. He's at 99. Let's see if Joe hit 100 while we were streaming.
Ninja of Spades. If you have not subscribed to Dr. Joe's channel, go do it now.
I wonder if I could put it in.
Put the link in the comments.
Hold on. Let me get it. I'll throw it in the comments so we can get him to 100 real quick. Like, he's got some good stuff, man. He was, like I said, he was a professor for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, he's got oh no, I can't paste. Why can't I paste? Oh no. I'm struggling.
He says, "Ugh, oy vey."
I'm gonna post it as you. Sorry.
That's fine. Link him in DESC.
Description. Oh yeah, I don't think you can click on links in here.
Oh, I didn't even know
I'll
that.
add it to description.
Well, I think we'll do the. Yeah, we'll do this later. We'll figure out how to send it to you. We should probably end the stream now. This is just
I like talking into the void, dude.
shouting into the void. That's what we do on this channel anyway. Until we get 100 subscribers.
Almost there. Give me 1 second. Oh, the live's not coming up. The current live's not coming up. Oh well. All right, I'll link it after this. Josh, anything before we go?
Oh yes, one thing. If Donald Trump gets assassinated in the next few years, Netanyahu did it. I'm just letting you know.
No, it was definitely Iran, dude. Iran definitely did it. Iran did it.
He was trying to sue for peace, and Iran came to the peace summit and was so upset that they killed him anyway. Even though that's what they said. They said they want peace.
Yes, I do. Josh is young. He's getting there.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. But yeah, no, it was definitely Iran. Definitely Iran did that.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. Later.